For centuries, Africa has been the world's treasure chest, its veins coursing with gold, oil, diamonds, and rare earths. But for just as long, this immense wealth has often been a curse, drawing the greedy eyes of empires, corporations, and powerful nations, leaving behind a trail of exploitation, conflict, and unfulfilled promise. Today, we begin a story that challenges this very narrative. A story of a young, unseasoned leader rising from the ashes of a nation besieged, and his audacious defiance against one of the world's most powerful figures. This is the tale of Ibrahim Traoré, and a moment that could forever redefine Africa's relationship with global powers. This is Africa's Bold Decision. Please subscribe to our channel and let's continue. Our journey begins in the heart of the Sahel, a vast, complex, and often misunderstood region of West Africa. Imagine a land of ancient kingdoms, where resilience is etched into the very landscape. Burkina Faso, the land of upright people, a nation of proud traditions, vibrant cultures, and, critically, immense, untapped wealth. Beneath its ochre sands lies a bounty of gold, manganese, zinc, phosphate, and the tantalizing whispers of oil. But for all its riches, Burkina Faso has long wrestled with profound challenges. Poverty, climate change, and weak governance have created fertile ground for an insurgency that has ravaged the Sahel for over a decade. Jihadist groups, capitalizing on local grievances, have spread like wildfire, displacing millions, disrupting economies, and tearing apart the social fabric. Into this maelstrom stepped Ibrahim Traoré. Not through a ballot box, but through the crucible of a military coup. In September 2022, at just 34 years old, Captain Traoré seized power, becoming the world's youngest head of state. His rise was a symptom of a deeper discontent, a population desperate for change, for security, and for a government that truly put their interests first. What possessed this young officer to take on such a monumental challenge? Traoré wasn't born into privilege. He was a product of the very instability he sought to quell. A geology student turned soldier, he had seen firsthand the devastating impact of the insurgency on his people. He had fought on the front lines, tasted the dust and the fear, and witnessed the disillusionment with previous leadership, whom he accused of failing to protect the nation. Burkina Faso had become a textbook case of the resource curse, a nation rich in minerals, yet struggling with widespread poverty. For decades, its gold, in particular, had flowed out of the country, benefiting foreign corporations and a select few local elites, while the majority of the population saw little tangible improvement in their lives. The irony was bitter. The very wealth that should have been a blessing became a magnet for instability, fueling criminal networks and funding extremist groups. The narrative of exploitation wasn't new. It was a thread woven through centuries of African history, from the transatlantic slave trade to colonial resource extraction, and right up to what many now call neocolonialism, where economic and political influence replaced direct rule, but the ultimate goal remained the same: access to resources on favorable terms. The very ground beneath their feet, rich with geological promise, had become a battleground. And this young captain, Ibrahim Traoré, arrived on the scene with a different vision. He wasn't just another military strongman. He spoke a language that resonated with a frustrated generation: sovereignty, self-determination, Pan-Africanism, and, crucially, the reclamation of Burkina Faso's resources for its own people. His public addresses were raw, direct, and often unvarnished. He spoke of breaking free from dependency, especially from former colonial powers like France, whose military presence and economic policies were increasingly viewed with suspicion by the Burkina populace. He called for a fundamental shift in how Burkina Faso engaged with the world, pushing for partnerships built on mutual respect, not subservience. This rhetoric wasn't unique to Traoré. Across the Sahel, and indeed, across parts of Africa, a new wave of leaders and popular movements were questioning the established order. They saw the lingering shadows of colonial influence, the economic agreements that seemed perpetually skewed, and the perceived indifference of traditional Western allies to their most pressing security and development needs. The ground was shifting. But it was Traoré, in the crucible of Burkina Faso's crisis, who would soon face the ultimate test of this new resolve. For in the halls of power in Washington, D.C., a different kind of calculation was being made. A calculation that saw Africa not just as a humanitarian challenge, but as a strategic chessboard and a vast, untapped vault of resources. In this particular strategic equation, one figure loomed larger than life: Donald J. Trump. A businessman, a deal-maker, a man who saw the world through the lens of transaction and perceived advantage. His America First doctrine wasn't just about domestic policy, it was a global manifesto, demanding that every international engagement serve a clear, tangible benefit for the United States. And when it came to Africa, that benefit increasingly revolved around access to raw materials and countering rival powers. The stage was set for a collision course, a young African revolutionary, imbued with the spirit of Pan-African liberation, confronting a global superpower intent on securing its strategic interests. The whispers of gold and the promise of oil would form the crucible of this confrontation. What was the nature of this proposal? How was it presented? And what was at stake for a continent striving to redefine its destiny? Join us in Part 2, as we unravel the details of Trump's audacious offer and the high-stakes diplomacy that would test the very limits of Burkina Faso's newly proclaimed sovereignty. In our last episode, we introduced Ibrahim Traoré, the defiant young leader of Burkina Faso, a nation rich in untapped resources but gripped by a brutal insurgency. We set the stage for a dramatic geopolitical encounter, an encounter shaped by centuries of exploitation and a new, assertive vision for African sovereignty. Today, we peel back the curtain on the proposal that shook the foundations of this burgeoning independence. To understand the proposal, we must first understand the man behind it, or at least the philosophy he embodied: Donald J. Trump. His foreign policy, famously dubbed America First, was a radical departure from traditional diplomatic norms. It wasn't about nation building, or spreading democracy, or even always about alliances of shared values. It was about deals. Big deals. Deals that demonstrably benefited American interests, often with a transactional and zero-sum approach. For Trump, the world was a marketplace, and every nation a potential partner or competitor in a vast economic game. Resources, especially strategic minerals and energy, were prime commodities. While the details of the Trump administration's engagement with Africa were often less publicized than its dealings with China or Europe, its underlying strategy was clear: secure access to vital resources, counter the growing influence of rivals like China and Russia, and protect American businesses. Burkina Faso, with its abundant gold and the tantalizing prospect of viable oil reserves, was a prime target for this America First lens. The instability plaguing the nation made its resources seem both more accessible due to desperate circumstances and more strategic in the fight against terrorism, a convenient dual narrative. So, what exactly was the proposal? While official channels remain tight-lipped and direct, face-to-face negotiations between Traoré and Trump himself are unlikely, reliable sources and diplomatic whispers painted a clear picture of a comprehensive, multifaceted offer presented through high-level intermediaries from the Trump administration. This wasn't a casual suggestion, it was a meticulously crafted package, designed to be irresistible. At its core, the proposal was at security for resources, trade. The Trump administration would offer significant, perhaps unprecedented, military aid and sophisticated counterterrorism support to Burkina Faso. This included advanced training for its beleaguered army, intelligence sharing, and potentially even direct, discreet operational assistance against the jihadist groups ravaging the country. This was the immediate, urgent need that Traoré and his people faced daily. In exchange, Burkina Faso would grant long-term, highly preferential mining and exploration rights for its gold and potential oil reserves to specific American companies. These weren't just any companies, they were entities with direct or indirect ties to powerful figures within the administration, or those deemed strategically important for American resource security. The terms, according to those familiar with similar proposals elsewhere on the continent, would have been structured to ensure American corporate dominance. This could have included exclusive or majority stakes, granting U.S. entities the primary share in new or existing ventures. Favorable tax regimes. Loopholes or reduced royalties that would significantly cut down on the revenue Burkina Faso would earn. Infrastructure development tied to resource extraction, American companies building roads, railways, or ports, but primarily to facilitate the export of resources, not necessarily to benefit local communities comprehensively. Long-term contracts, locking Burkina Faso into agreements spanning decades, regardless of future market changes or evolving national priorities. And there was a powerful sweetener. Beyond security and resource deals, the proposal hinted at a broader embrace by the international community. Burkina Faso, isolated by instability and facing potential sanctions for its military takeovers, would find itself welcomed back into the fold. Promises of diplomatic support and a pathway to increased foreign investment from non-resource sectors were dangled as incentives. The implication was clear. Cooperate, and stability, development, and international legitimacy would follow. For a nation teetering on the brink, facing an existential threat from terrorism and desperate for economic relief, this was an offer designed to be irresistible. It promised an immediate solution to their most pressing problem, security. And it held out the tantalizing prospect of economic revitalization, even if the terms were heavily skewed in favor of the foreign partners. The logic from the Trump administration's side was simple, direct, and, in their view, mutually beneficial. We help you with your most urgent crisis, and in return, we secure vital resources and strategic positioning in a critical region. It was the ultimate win-win in the Trump playbook, where a winning for the US was the paramount objective. But Ibrahim Traoré, it soon became clear, was not playing by the old rules. He represented a new generation of African leaders who had witnessed decades of such deals. They had seen their nation's wealth bleed away, their sovereignty eroded, and their people left behind. They understood that assistance often came with strings, and that partnership too often meant subservience. The proposal, however enticing on the surface, awakened deep-seated historical grievances. It echoed the colonial concessions, the neo-colonial agreements, and the structural adjustment programs that had often left African nations more indebted and less in control of their own destinies. To Traoré and his supporters, this was not a partnership, it was a sophisticated form of resource capture, wrapped in the flag of counterterrorism. The timing of the offer was also crucial. Traoré had just consolidated power. His legitimacy, both domestically and internationally, was still fragile. Accepting such a deal might have stabilized his regime in the short term, but at what long-term cost to his vision of true Burkina and African sovereignty? Would he be seen as a puppet, or a true revolutionary? The decision facing Ibrahim Traoré was monumental. It wasn't just about gold or oil, it was about the very soul of his nation. Would he capitulate to the overwhelming power of a global giant, securing immediate relief but potentially sacrificing future generations' economic independence? Or would he take a stand, risking further isolation and intensifying the struggles his people already faced, but asserting a principle that could resonate across the entire continent? In our next episode, we will detail the dramatic moment of refusal. We'll explore the immediate aftermath, the geopolitical ripples felt across the Sahel and beyond, and the audacious reasoning behind a young leader's no to the world's most powerful man. This was the moment Africa truly spoke. Don't miss the audacious no to.